So thank you everybody to join us today. So my name is Henry Du. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of Huski.ai. I'm very honored today to have the privileges to moderate today's panel. So as our attendees to trickle in, let me give some background about why Huski.ai decided to organize this roundtable. This is actually our second one. So Huski.ai's founding slogan was protecting ownership of originality. So right now, generative AI gains very a lot of popularity and become more accessible. An important question emerges is how do we want to protect creators' copyright from AI-generated content? In this roundtable, a panel of experts representing a broad range of industry will discuss related issues so that we can better understand the current stage of generative AI, its future implication to copyright protection, and even the society as a whole. I think we all look forward to this discussion, but first allow me to introduce our exceptional panels. Daniel Jeffries, let me share you my PowerPoint. First, Daniel Jeffries, Chief Intelligence Officer from Stability.ai. Stability.ai is the company behind one of the most popular large generative AI models, Stable Diffusion. Maybe many of you in the audience already have tried their services and enjoy the fun of generating fantastic images by typing a few words. So Dan, do you want to give a little bit introduction about yourself?
Sure, I'm Daniel Jeffries. I'm the CIO of Stability, as we already said, but I've had a long history in both artificial intelligence and in information technology. For many years, I was at Red Hat, and I had an IT consulting company. I'm an artist myself. I've been a writer for 20 years, professional blogger. And so I have a kind of unique perspective on both the technology and the art side of the house. And it's wonderful to be here today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So our next panel is Tim Tully. Tim is a partner at Menlo Ventures, a Silicon Valley-based venture capital firm with more than 45 years of history in investment. Menlo Ventures has backed over 75 public companies with $5 billion under management. If you have talked to Siri on iPhone or called Uber, then you have used the product by Menlo Ventures. Tim, can you introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. You mentioned I've been at Menlo Ventures for a year and a half. I mostly invest in AI, ML, cloud database, things sort of in the DevOps, DevSecOps space. Before that, I was CTO at Splunk. I ran product and engineering there for a number of years. And then before that was at Yahoo for many years running engineering teams there as well. Great to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you here. So our next panelist is Michael Geller, a partner from at DLA Piper. DLA Piper is a global law firm with lawyers located in more than 40 different countries worldwide. DLA Piper was ranked #3 law firm in the world by revenue in 2019. So Michael, can you introduce a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Sounds like I'm the least intelligent and least creative among the panelists, but no. I'll go for it. Tim helps predict the future. Daniel helps create it. I just tell you what you can and you can't do for the most part. I am a branding and a trademark and a copyright lawyer. Been active in this space for more than a decade, helping clients create brands, helping clients create content, and basically build their brands and their materials, both in the physical world and now as we expand into the metaverse and the metaverses, increasingly helping them figure out what that means to their brand, how to protect themselves in those areas, and how to grow their brands there.
Yeah, I think you are so humble. I think the most innovation work is from lawyers because the world becomes so complex right now. So you need a lot of innovation to do your job every day, right?
You know what? I'll take that comment and I'll bring it back to the compensation people at DLA Piper and I'll tell them that.
Yes. So also I have to, I'm sorry to inform everyone that Mr. Mariano Diaz cannot join us because of family obligation to travel to Argentina. He's right now on a flight. And he wants to pass his apologies to everybody and his absence. He does have a few questions to ask the rest of the panel, so I will try to fill in his blank in the following discussion. So our audience today is from all over the world as well, representing a wide range of disciplines, from engineers, investors from Silicon Valley, to university professors, students, artists, and partners, lawyers at different law firms. So welcome everybody. So I'm so excited. So let's get started. So we have about 1.5 hours. So first hour, we're gonna discuss in a roundtable format. And then the next 30 minutes, we're gonna answer questions from the audience. So from last feedback from our last session, our audience want to listen to a very heated discussions. They want to see what our panel's instincting insights. So we didn't give much time for our speaker to prepare this time. So let's use a freestyle. So anytime you have any question, let's stop us or on a panelist. You can just direct us. So at the back end, Tessa and Guan is watching for the from Huski.ai is watching the test session along the way to feed us questions from the audience as well. So let me start with a question for Dan. So can you give us a little background about what generative AI and what stability diffusion is?
I mean, generative AI is anything where an artificial intelligence, usually a machine learning model, is creating text, images, video, 3D assets, etc. And it can be anything from very simple things like generating a little bit of poetry to generating a complex and coherent image. Stable Diffusion is similar to things like Dolly or Midjourney, and that it's able to create images based on just descriptions from text. And the main difference being that it's open source and the model itself, the weights are downloadable. So that changed the game a great deal in that, basically with Dolly and things like that, you have just a simple API and a one interface that you're working with. But we've already seen this kind of explosion of innovation from Stable Diffusion, and that basically told us that there were all kinds of fantastic developers and smart folks out there who were just waiting to get their hands on these kind of foundation models. And so we've seen everything from people generating synthetic brain scans for medical imaging and synthetic lung scans. We've seen people doing stuff with AR where they're able to generate wallpaper and change it in real time in a room for decoration. We've seen people doing, editing video. One very popular app on social media comes from Dream Booth. I just heard about it yesterday from my wife, where influencers are sending their pictures in, and somebody's basically just putting them through Dream Booth and generating their the women in different like heritage style dresses and dresses from the 1950s and stuff. And so people are really excited about that. It's kind of a brand new way of sort of seeing themselves. And so we're just seeing kind of this explosion of innovation. That's just a few of the applications that we've seen. I can't even keep track of them all. Unstable Diffusion was the fastest application to 10,000 GitHub stars probably ever. And it hit 33,000. I don't even know what it's at now within like 2 months. And I think the closest thing to that, was something like 2 or 3 years. So it's been a phenomenon, and it's been quite wonderful to be a part of.
Oh, that's fascinating. And also it's very nice to hear a lot of different applications. It really helped us a lot to create. So also Stability.ai just raised $100 million recently and become a unicorn. And also I heard that you are in process of raising another $1 billion. Is that true?
No, I certainly can't. I certainly can't comment on any kind of rumor like that.
Yes, okay. But already $100 million, already a lot of investment. I'm just so curious about what do you need that much fund for? So what's future development you are working on right now in Stability.ai?
Well, so our research teams are focused on everything from, there's OpenBioML, Carper, Eluther.ai, all of these different teams are working on different things. So you have folks, Harmonize is working on music generation. You have folks working on large language models. You have folks working on video and text and biotext. So really anywhere where it could potentially be useful. I would say the way that I spent a lot of times in machine learning operations, and I think the general thought process was that we were going to have every company out there having 100 data scientists, data engineers, and building machine learning models. I think that's proving to be not true, and we're going to see some consolidation in that space. I run the Infrastructure Alliance, so I get to talk to a lot of different folks there, and I think most companies are just simply not going to interact with artificial intelligence at the level of ingesting data, running experiments, training, deploying, managing, et cetera, right? You might be doing some XGBoost and some term prediction and some basic things like that. But when we're talking about foundation models, the fact is, why do you need a lot of money? You need a lot of money because it's very expensive. It's expensive in terms of compute. It's expensive in terms of talent. It's expensive in terms of people. It's expensive in terms of time. And so what we're going to see is most people interacting with artificial intelligence at a higher level, APIs, fine tuning, chaining different assets together. You might see an artist, do a painting, an under painting, run it through image to image and maybe a face scan, get 20 iterations of a cartoon frog and go, oh, that one's amazing. And then paint a bunch of additional things over the top of it in say Photoshop and then do another 50 iterations, and that becomes kind of a pipeline as opposed to, ingesting the data and doing all this kind of stuff. So there's going to be a subset of companies that are just basically foundation companies, and they're going to be the ones training the most advanced models. And they're going to be few and far between because it's so expensive. And there's always going to be a set of models that are at the bleeding edge. If you're running a supercomputer of H100s or whatever comes next from that, there's going to be a small subset of companies that are generating those both for customers and via API. And then over time, as the compute increases, it gets cheaper. You'll see the older architectures either be trained from start by AI-driven businesses, or you'll see them beginning to fine tune and change those models. Probably continual learning as we start to crack that code. But in general, most of those most cutting edge models for the foreseeable future, barring a black swan, in other words, barring a different way of training artificial intelligence, right? In other words, if we're able to figure out how to teach from a small subset of experiences, or we're able to teach people through mimicry in the way that humans do. If I take a kid out in the back, I can throw the ball to him a bunch of times, and in 2 weeks or so, he'll have figured out how to catch the ball. Maybe he's not going to go play in the pros, but depending upon his aptitude, he may watch a bunch of games and practice over the course of 10 years, and then maybe he would play professional or play in college, right? But it's a much smaller subset of data. Experiences are really nothing but data, and it's a much smaller subset. So if we can crack the code of how humans learn, that might change it. But with the current way that we sort of train artificial intelligence it's going to be a very small subset of companies that are training the most cutting edge models, and it's very expensive.
Okay. So I get two words. One is it's very expensive. Second, you need a lot of data right now. So that's the two hurdles right now you need to overcome at least, right?
Those are the most basic ones. Yeah, I mean, and the quality of that data and then very smart people, all right? And very smart people are expensive too. And it's not just, we read the paper and we implemented it. You also need the people who can think up the papers from the start, or who can read the papers and not just type in, okay, well, it has 50 layers and an attention mechanism, but the people who can understand what those different architectures are doing at an intuitive and creative level, and then apply their own ideas to it in the same way that I might be able to learn about writing fiction over the course of time from watching lots of movies and reading lots of books. But I don't want to just do the same thing that's been written before, right? I want to understand the deeper layers of storytelling so that I can create my own, unique story. And in the same way, you need machine learning researchers who are creative enough to understand what's happening at the creative layer and be able to apply their own ideas. So that's very expensive too.
Okay. So when we talk about the money, so let's ask the team a question. So as one of the best investors in industry, can you tell us a little bit about the recent investment wave in generative AI? What's the upside? What's the downside for suddenly pouring so much money into AI GC?
I mean, there's certainly a lot of capital that's been put into these companies, and it's been really fascinating to watch. You know, I'm pretty close to the guy from Cotu who put in the big dollars in the last round into Stability.ai, and you know, he's a really sharp guy, and I sort of trust his investing instincts, and you know, I think it makes a lot of sense. You know, I think you asked, hey, what are the pros and cons? I think the pros are, it's pretty clear this is a, you know, generational sort of technology, and it's going to create an inflection point in terms of content creation and how quickly it can be done and who can do it. It sort of just opens the aperture and makes it more accessible for a greater set of folks to create really, really fascinating content, right? I mean, that's essentially what it is. Yeah, there's a lot of other pros that I could, you know, go on and on about that I'm sure everyone else has heard of. From the sort of, I believe what you're looking for is, hey, what's the skeptical sort of VC sort of angle on it? Well, it's a lot of capital. It's a lot of capital early. And I think what a lot of investing folks would be looking for, particularly in this market, is, you know, the exact revenue traction that you want to see. Now that may be there. I don't know. I have to defer to Daniel, and I don't have the inside knowledge of where they're at from a revenue standpoint. But, you know, if it's there, then perhaps it justifies the price. I think the other thing that I think about, and, you know, this is just my 2 cents, is, you know, in the whole, you know, AIGC sort of realm, where does the winner come from? Right? This is a pretty hot topic, right? Is it the middleware layers? That's the best way I would call it, right? You know, things like Stable Diffusion, right? The sort of the algorithms that sit with REST API sitting on top of it that make it accessible. Is it that layer, the platform layer, that wins, or is it the end tool that wins? So you can imagine, I don't know. I don't know whether this is the case or not, but, you know, I would guess Adobe has a number of folks thinking about how to introduce, you know, Stable Diffusion style algorithms or whatever sort of derivative that you want to have inside of Photoshop, and making it so that you can create those images there or edit them or modify them. And my guess on how that would work is you would take some model off of Hugging Face or something and then retrain it even further within Photoshop directly. So it's more sort of attenuated for the specific needs of that user who's creating the content inside of the product. So long story short, you know, is the big winner coming from the platform? Very well could be. Or is it coming from the end user tool where, you know, the content's actually, you know, most likely being created more so? I don't know. I mean, what I can tell you is this idea that, you know, people are going to increasingly be able to retrain models faster and faster. I suspect on commodity hardware, frankly, not just NVIDIA cards in the cloud somewhere, right? The whole idea around sparse neural networks is coming pretty fast. And so the ability to be able to train models or retrain models using those types of technologies would be able to happen on your Mac laptop, right? So, you know, does it happen there or does it happen in the middle? I don't know, right? And so that's maybe just a risk. I wouldn't call it a con per se.
Okay. That sounds great. So it looks like a lot of money in different investing in different layer of generative AI, and it's a very bright future about generative AI. I kind of feel it's very empowered to be a creator, because right now creating is so easy, right? And it's fun. So let me show you something I just did before the meeting. So I was trying to ask AI what's 4-person roundtable discussion looks like in their views. So the generates an image from the left side. Even though it's not perfect, but it's something, right? So sometimes the face is not clear yet, but it's do generate something for us without much effort from me. Also, from the right side, you can see this is one of the, sorry, let me adjust my screen. So this is one of the latest, sorry, my screen died a little bit. So again, a little bit technical problem. So I couldn't see my screen. So, okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, okay, it's back. So on the right side, it's a little different fun art generated use Midjourney. It's really fascinating to see this kind of quality arts being generated. much better than what I can imagine even. So I think this really empowered a lot of us. So next is, recently I read an article also from Secure Capital. They are depicting a very futuristic new world with generative AI, but also there is a few of essential concerns. The first one is copyright. So with Michael here as a copyright expert, let me ask Michael a few tough questions. So we recently, this image went to the news because this is AI generated art. And this went to the first place in a competition in Colorado fire. So a lot of people question is really human created this or the AI generated is. So what we did is we try to analyze the DNA of this art and found. So the top right one is the original art, and then when we do the DNA analysis of the arts, we found there's a lot of similar content generated by the humans. So if you compare the style, you compare the coloring, kind of thing, it's all very similar. So let's ask Michael, do you think this can be a potentially copyright issues for the AI generated content?
For this one right here?
Mm. I know this stuff.
So, I mean, looking at it immediately, it's hard to say at a glance. Probably not. I mean, when you think about copyright infringement, you got to think about a couple different elements. The first element of copyright infringement is first you have to have something that's protected. You have to have a registration in order to get into federal court. You can do that on the backside. You don't have to register beforehand. The more difficult element here is copying, right? You either have to have A, actual copying, or B, you have to have access and substantial similarity. Now, there are things that even if you copy elements of them, then they're just elements that are out there in space and time as well. So there are things that are called like scène faire, just kind of common topics. So maybe it's people looking out a circular portal. That's kind of a well-known kind of scene, so to speak, in fantasy kind of fiction and art and things like that. So it's hard to demonstrate some kind of protection around that. This is kind of generally dancing around the idea of what's called the idea versus expression dichotomy. You cannot protect an idea, right? You go back to the Social Network movie. And it's that you cannot protect the idea of Facebook, right? You have to have some kind of protection element around it. So it's the expression of things that are actually protectable. What's written on the page, what's fixed on the page. The idea of looking out towards a circular portal, that's not necessarily protected. So I think as you progress, you will get more and more images that are created. And the question is whether the access to these images was taken, whether basically the AI material or the AI software had access and scraped data or learned data from certain artistic elements, and then created elements based off of it, and whether those elements that were created are different enough and not substantially similar, such that there's no unlawful copying. A lot of these are artistic elements that will have to be separated out. You see this a lot in, for instance, music litigation, right? Where you bring a music expert in, and a huge part of music litigation is just listening to a set of chords and saying, well, one expert on one side will say, well, that's a common set of chords. And if you go all the way back to the big band era and Artie Shaw, and they played those 4 chords in order, they'll do an example from the 20s and the 50s and the 90s. And the other expert on the other side will say, no. All those examples are different. And this is a unique element that was copied, and here's why it was copied. So there may, at a certain point, be a battle of experts to figure out whether things are substantially similar and whether they're protected.
Okay, so there's the underlying questions, because before, when human copy things, it's quite straightforward because humans have a limited memories. I can looking at maybe 50 different drawings, let me combine them and make a final drawing. Then the copying element is very obviously, right? It's because you only have a small sample size. Because for right now, the generative AI, to my understanding, it's a huge model. It's used millions or maybe billions of different images. So the contribution of each image into the final image is very small, right? So then it's like we do learn from this image, but it's the elements is too small in the final product. So do you think we should change the law or do something to allow this kind of or protect this original content from being learned and then still just slightly content to the final product? Because right now our law protect a whole piece of art like a whole ownership. I just want to see, is there anything happening in the legal perspective?
Well, right now, the Congress is currently addressing a part of the, really focusing on a part of the Copyright Act, an element of the DMCA. All of that is to say Congress is about 20 years behind on technology in terms of the Copyright Act. And that's usually about where they sit in terms of legislating copyrights, is about 20 to 30 years behind. So I wouldn't hold your breath in terms of any, brand new developments in the AI space, especially when it comes to content creators. I think it's something that they're looking at, but I don't think you're going to see any kind of new legislation out immediately. More likely, the relevant law is going to come from courts. There's at least one lawsuit, right, that's out there. GitHub got sued. That was over more on the coding side than the generating content per se, and the use of code. And that's a class action lawsuit that came up 2-3 weeks ago or so. I think you'll probably start to see more of those type of actions, and that's probably that's it, right? And that's where the majority of the law will come, and the courts are going to have to wrestle with these issues and think through them really carefully because they are complex.
Okay. So then I jump to one of the questions is since you mentioned about this lawsuit. So I have a question is, when you use AI to generate something, you become the creator or the AI is a creator or the people who write the code of the AI are the creator? So who owns the piece of work generated by the AI? I want to see each of you, what's your opinions? Maybe you can start from the team.
It's a good question. I'm not sure what the answer would be, but I would assume it's not the algorithm, right? I think it's, there's this whole notion of prompt engineering, right? Which is sort of, what's the text you use to sort of generate, like, there's some sort of art to that, and there's ways to sort of gamify it and, get more creative with it, and that, in a way that produces better results. And so I'm inclined to say it's actually the human, right, who's doing the prompt engineering, submitting the text, and then producing the result.
Okay. Dan, how about your opinion?
To me, the concept is pretty simple. The AI is nothing but a tool. I take great issue with the idea that the AI is stitching things together. Back in the last slide, you kind of chose images that sort of look similar, which sort of implicitly implies that it's stitching together. It doesn't do that. That's not what the tool does. It doesn't function that way. That's a complete misunderstanding of how it works. Like, if you said there's billions of images in there, there's 5 billion images in there. So is that one 5 billionth of a thing? It's like, are we going to say that's something's nose? No, the algorithm learns what concept of nose is in the same way. An artist learns the concept of noses and is able to draw them in all kinds of different shapes, big and small, and dainty, etc., and learns those different things, right, over the course of time. So I would say, like, in the same way, this to me is a bit like asking whether Photoshop owns the art that you're doing. And again, it's a lot of times it's people just say, I'm typing in a prompt, but and creating something, but the truth is that most of these things are just going to be, that's not the way that most people are going to use the tools. Like, that's the way that people are going to use the tools, just for fun, and generating memes, and maybe it's integrated into TikTok or something like that, and people just play with it. And the thing that we're seeing with the Heritage app, people just sending in their pictures so that they can see what they look like in different dresses, right? And so that's that's cool, but so that's kind of how end users will use the app. But when you're talking about kind of professional tools, like I think Tim, hinted it earlier, if somebody was building a sort of Photoshop end user space for it or a platform, right, a concept designer, that's a workflow. It's really no different than having Photoshop itself, and I described that workflow earlier, right? If somebody's generating a piece of concept art, they're not just going to type into the prompts, and there's sort of the sense that, the only art jobs, is going to be people typing in prompts, and that's nonsense. I mean, obviously, like, artists are, amazing, and you have to understand how art works to be able to do something. Just because you can, type in a prompt doesn't mean that you know how to do it. So, but it's going to benefit the people most who are able to like type something in, iterate on what they're doing, change different elements of it. That whole workflow, right? And so that workflow means it's the same thing. So it's really the person creating that thing through that push-pull interaction with the tool, right? And it's really just the tool itself. Now, I suppose there's edge cases where if we get, you showed some mid-journey images, and we're going to see sort of a rapid convergence, in the next couple of years of very strong capabilities where the AI is able to create something that looks, incredibly beautiful and coherent nearly every time. And I suspect people will just set up, artificial intelligence that's just kind of dreaming things all of the time, right? And so at some level, if humans aren't even interacting with it, right? In other words, if somebody's just written a program or whatever to generate things, then theoretically we get to some point where the AI or the software or whatever just owns that. But I would say in general, the way that this is going to work is just as another tool in the box, in the same way that a pencil or a paintbrush or a camera is going to be a tool, right? And many years later, we're going to look back on this and go, why were people thinking about this as anything but a tool? Because it's just going to be a part of that workflow. So I think it very much will, in the end, fall on what the creator does with it.
Okay.
So as a practical means, right? Like when you file a copyright application, the Copyright Office has said that if you put down as you have to have like a claimant on somebody who claims the copyright, if your author of your copyright is purely a computer, it's AI, it's a program, it's an algorithm, it's some line of code. If it's purely a computer, it can't obtain a copyright registration. So it has to be human assisted, a human assisted image. So a human has to participate in some element. So Daniel's exactly right that like it's your AI or your whether it's the API or whatever you're using is basically just your pen or your pencil. The bigger question, and Daniel's right, and he's kind of framing this issue how I would have him frame the issue if I were preparing him for a deposition, right? Is that he's really leaning into this idea of idea expression dichotomy. He is saying that like this is all about expression, man. When when my technology looks at a piece of art, it's not taking it like a piece of wallpaper, right? It's not ripping it off like a piece of wallpaper and ripping another piece of wallpaper off and putting them together and saying, oh, look, I'm just kind of pasting two images by each other. And Daniel, tell me if I'm completely out in space here. The software is looking at it and saying, oh, that wallpaper looks like 1950s wallpaper. And based on a billion other images I've seen, I know what 50s wallpaper looks like. And here's my idea of what it looks like, as opposed to just pasting two things on the wall, right? That's where you start to move into that expression. And then somebody on the other end of the line is going to go, no. You're taking all of those pieces of wallpaper and using the idea that some little hook that's embedded deep into that and using that within another one, and even taking that little square of the wallpaper that you think looks like it, that expression, if it carries over into your material, then that's a copyright infringement. Now, the further you get from the original material, the original expression of the material, if that hasn't been copied, the more difficult it is. And Daniel's exactly right, leaning into the expression of this. Daniel, tell me I'm all wet and wrong. And
no, you're correct. And like actually, where the stitching together argument falls apart is when you look at, you go look at some of the fantastic creations and you see like, a cartoon frog like made out of paint riding a bicycle. Go and show me any other piece of art that has ever been created on the planet where there's a frog made out of paint riding a bicycle, right? So these it's able to understand concepts at an incredible level. And actually OpenAI did a study on this in the early days of Dolly, right? Where they were looking at, did it ever just regurgitate, is what they call it in machine learning, right? Just regurgitate an image exactly. What they found is that in the early data set, if they had very low quality vector art, like super low quality vector art, and there were too many instances of it, that in a few edge cases it could generate something similar. So they just purged that stuff from the database, right? In other words, if it's just a circle and a dot, right, then there's a chance it could recreate that in these very, very tiny edge cases. So something that was super low quality, and so they just took that stuff out of there. The other one they found is they had, I don't know, they had 10,000 images of a static clock that had been put into the database, 10,000 different times, because everyone had used the stock image basically as their stock clock on all these different websites. So when it saw, when it thought of like clock on a desk, it thought of that. So basically the answer to that is, again, and this is basic machine learning 101, right? To building a sort of commercial product, is deduping the data set. In other words, they just cut out those thousands of images so that it doesn't learn that this is just precisely a clock. In other words, if I just feed it 10,000 images with the same clock, of course it's going to recreate that, right? It doesn't know any other version. But if I feed it the concepts of clock, right, and then all of a sudden now it's able to do a melting clock made out of of bananas, right? That's fantastic. So it really does learn concepts. And I think I even saw someone in a very bad faith way the other day kind of say, no, it's really just stitching together. And they made a crappy collage of themselves to prove this point in MS Paint, right? Where they just took woman with a pearl necklace, or a pearl earring, and woman, and Starry Night, and deliberately crappily stitched it together. It's well, at least generate an AI image to say that that's the case, right? Don't do a Photoshop collage to pretend that that's what's happening, because it's not. It really is understanding these concepts as these models get bigger, and this is very different. And there's a reason, and I think this is where I'll step into it a little and defer to Michael, but I'll say, I think that there's a reason that for 30 years or longer, courts have come down on the side of either you're directly copying this thing exactly, you've taken it off the wall, you've put it in there, you copied it exactly, which is legal, or you've done something transformative, right? There's the case about the Warhol painting now and things like that. And there's the reason that you don't want this, and this is the can of worms, and I think everyone who's sort of saying no, change it now, we have to be able to protect it in this new era, I don't know that they understand the can of worms that they're opening, because as soon as somebody is able to copyright anime style or fantasy art style and sue everyone on ArtStation out of existence, because they were the first one who got there and were able to show some kind of prior art or whatever, I think that's a horrible world. I don't know that that's one that I'd be excited about, right? And where we have to go and have 30 experts on either side go, well, anime had an early thing in 1926, and it kind of looks like this, and then no, this is definitely an anime style, so you can't do this anymore. Again, I didn't, that I think is incredibly important for people to consider, is that there's when we're worried about AI, it's generally because we've had so many sci-fi stories over the course of time giving us this idea that it's a robot and it's sort of taking over the world, or it's going to kill all the jobs. I think these are exactly what they are, just sci-fi stories. And so I think it creates this disproportionate sort of fear of artificial intelligence that's really unproductive, right? And I think when folks are clamoring for, well, let's make sure we're copywriting style, I think they're going to be very displeased with how that plays out over time, if that becomes the case, and suddenly they're going to find that they can't paint in a classic fantasy portrait or a sci-fi portrait, because that looks a little bit like a little like Halo. So you're not allowed to paint anything in that looks remotely like, Halo in your fantasy or your sci-fi artwork. I think that'll be not a fun place to live.
Yeah, I think that would be a hard argument to make. I think that you're copying a style, or that I have a copyright over, a style per se. I think that really falls on the side of kind of an idea, a painting within a specific style. But there are elements within styles, right, that if you copy, technically can be copied. And I think some of the elements come in. So you're exactly right that a lot of the courts have looked at, have you exactly copied something? But for instance, a lot of the music litigation that you see is like blurred lines, right? So blurred lines was this, the Robin Thicke song. He comes out with this song, and the person who sued him, and I'm going to get this wrong because I haven't looked at this in years and years, but the inspiration song that he got sued on came out in like the 80s, and the question, or the 90s or early 90s or 80s or something like this, and the question is, well, did you copy it? And he's going to go, no, I didn't copy it. Of course he's going to say no, right? The question at that point is, did you have access to it? And if you had access to it, like how often did it play on the radio? And like, how would you have access to it? What libraries? What libraries was it in? How, would that hook that you copied, even if you did copy it, did you copy it, and how would it get stuck in your head? So I think some of that, Daniel, to your point, is going to come down to what did the AI software, the API, whatever technology is under there, what did it go out and do? What data did it take? What did it take as its quote unquote inspiration, right? When it's doing its diffusion, and is it what it took originally as inspiration and learned from? Is there something that's protectable in there? And was it what was copied substantially similar to the original? You're exactly right that the more that you're saying, oh, well, you're copying a style, whether it's anime or Halo or whatever, fantasy, whatever it might be, the more that's your argument, I think the more difficult it's going to be.
Yes. So also I have a follow-up question. It's very interesting discussion is because right now we cannot copy a style, right? So, but if machines learn from human, if right now you see it's all not copying, it's just borrowing something, it's not infringing. So then as an original creator, I lose my incentive to create. Why don't I just use generative AI to generate everything I do? I don't even think about creating new things. Then at one point, I think the system will converge to a point there nothing new will be generated by humans. So the AI will out of data to learn from. At that point, is humankind become a problem because we lose our motivation to generate new things? Is that become a problem for us?
Well, that won't happen. Humans are always going to want to create. Well, because humans are always going to want to create stuff. I actually don't care whether somebody comes out with a text model that can generate my particular style of article, right? Or my style of book. I've been a professional writer for a decade, right? And I'm still going to write articles because I want to write articles, and I love writing them, and I love conceiving of them. I love thinking about that process. I love the process of artwork, right? And so we're just going to have more artwork in the same way that, like, when the Kindles came out, people said, oh, the gatekeepers have come down. It's now we've got all of these people who could just, all these writers who can now just suddenly write and publish directly. The horror, the wonder of it. Like, I mean, now we've had things like Wool and great sci-fi books or whatever that have won awards that would never have even been published. And yeah, there's also some crap too, right? I mean, because if you open the gates, it allows more people to do stuff who maybe aren't as skilled, but it also allows a whole bunch of people who were formerly kept out by the 6 publishing houses to come through. So we're just going to see more artwork. I mean, some people don't have any inclination, whatever, to draw, or wouldn't have the skills to do it, and they're going to be able to do things like the gals are generating pictures of themselves in heritage dresses, right? I mean, that's super cool. They wouldn't be able to go paint that themselves. So look, artists are always going to create things, and again, it's also going to become a sort of self-learning system. Like, in other words, I was talking to the team the other day about generating all kinds of synthetic data, and somebody was taking the chat GPT and asking it to generate prompts and then putting it into Stable Diffusion or Midjourney and was getting these beautiful pictures back. And I was like, wow, somebody could just program that. And you have sort of an infinite data set of really cool images that are being created. So there's a ton of data. But again, humans are always going to want to create things. And it goes back to these things generally just being a tool for most artists. And the idea that we would suddenly stop creating, to me, seems like a weird red herring. I don't know why anyone's. I'm certainly not going to stop creating. I don't know any artist who's not going to, vociferously defend their right to create whatever they want, and to the end of time, regardless of whether AIs can do it too. People didn't stop playing Go, just because an AI beat them at Go. People, in fact, are now learning from the novel lesson that AlphaGo Zero has created. They study whole books on the unique games that the AI learned that we didn't learn in 3,000 different years before that, right? Because it learned a novel way to play, and they didn't suddenly stop playing Go because now there's a computer that can beat some of the the best players in the world. They just learn from it, and it's a self-iterative process, and that's the nature of life and the nature of art. We learn from the technology, we integrate it, and if it's not outside of us, it becomes a part of us, and it becomes a part of our workflow.
But then I think, yeah, go ahead, Tim.
I was going to say, I think for the longest time, people have been afraid of the notion of, say, sentient AIs or AI that can sort of discreetly replace things that humans are otherwise sort of responsible for, like, jobs, or now art is sort of the topic. And I think that has never happened, right? And the best applications of AI ML have always been augmentative in nature, right? Like the sort of canonical use case I think of is like Netflix, right? Like everything's very famous classifier and movie recommendation system that can, say, hey, you should look at these other adjacent movies based on your viewing history. I mean, that's a great example of augmentative AI, right? It's like, it's not in your face. It's not replacing something wholeheartedly. It's just like, hey, here's how we're helping you do better. And similarly, I think that's what something like Stability.ai is going to do, right? It's not going to fully replace the creative process, as Daniel mentioned. Like, people paint for a lot of reasons. One of them is the sort of therapeutic sort of aspect of going through the process of, many hours of creating something. People just enjoy that. And I think replacing that with prompt engineering is not really as cathartic as sitting in front of a canvas and actually doing it by hand. So I just, for some people it will replace it. I think for my suspicions, for most, it will not. It'll be more of an augmentative thing, right? So I may use it to sort of generate ideas for myself, right? Roughly, within the ballpark of what I want to paint. But I suspect oftentimes people will just go back to, doing it by hand after looking at the inspirational stuff generated, right? That'd be sort of one use case. Some people will go fully AIGC. Agree, that will definitely happen, but I don't think it'll be sort of the dominant end state.
So I'm going to be the dark cloud and tell me why I'm wrong. Because I have seen too many of what we affectionately call trolls. Right. So I've seen this happen, and I'll give an example. This has happened, since they invented those wonderful things called computers and, online and computer-based design, computer-assisted design, in the fashion space, specifically in the fabric space. Okay. So it used to be, if you wanted to create a fabric, gosh darn, you had to go out there and you had to literally, to use your words, Daniel, stitch them all together, right? You got to make it from hand. And then it came the computer, and you could make it much more easier on the computer. And then you could print it out, and then a machine could make it. And people started creating and obtaining copyright registrations for a whole host of fabrics. And there are companies that their sole job is to own a large swath of fabric registrations and go out and look for people who have similar ones and sue them. And though the intent largely is not to go to trial and vindicate someone's wonderful rights in creating fabric, but to get a quick settlement out of it and to get their license fee and to move on. So I think at least one of the Copyright Office's concerns in saying you can't have a computer who is solely responsible or can solely be the author of AI, is that some person is going to sit in Skull Mountain with their, handy dandy AI program and try to own all the world's art, right? And create a bunch of different imagery until we quote unquote run out of images, right? Run out of art that all the art is created, and go out and try to sue those nice folks who are trying to make good art just because it fills their soul. I think that's one of the concerns that people have to figure out a little bit. But Tim, Daniel, tell me why I'm wrong.
I mean, I don't know that you're wrong that people always try to game the system. I mean, that's essentially what you're describing, right? Like humans are fantastic at being jerks, right? I actually don't worry. I actually don't worry about the AI rising up and taking over, because humans have had no problem being jerks throughout all of history, right? And all of Mussolini didn't have computers and was just fine, being a jerk, right? And rallying people. He didn't have social media. We talk about social media being the destroyer of mankind, and I'm pretty sure that Mussolini and Hitler didn't have social media. They were able to rally up people just fine to do evil stuff, right? So, look, I think that to me feels more like, again, a legal anomaly, right? I think to generate all of the art in the world would be the equivalent of generating all of the atoms in the universe, right? And probably more. I think sometimes when people, I don't know how I'm not a physicist, but people do these calculations where they go, well, there's more possibilities of Go games, than there are atoms in the universe. Now, I don't know how they know how many atoms are in the universe, but I'm sure somebody smarter than me could figure it out, and then they can run the math. Say, if all of the games of Go were played based on this, we'd have more variations of those games based on that. So the idea that somebody would be able to go and generate every possible piece of artwork out there, they'd be at it for a long time with computers way more expensive than the ones that I currently have access to. And so, but certainly if that starts to happen, we should probably address that, and so that we don't have patent trolls. I think a lot of times patent trolls are maybe one of the worst side effects, if you will, to me, of the legal system, right? I got a patent on a spray bottle nozzle that I purchased, from an obscure company that went out of business in 1946, and so I'm going to go get a license fee from everybody. To me, that seems sort of a perversion of the law, and we generally have to deal with sort of perversions of the law as exactly that, as perversions of the law that need to be addressed, in the law. And so that would be my set of it. But I think if someone was trying to brute force through all the artwork in the universe, they'd have a hard time getting there.
Patent trolls are jerks. I think we found something we can all agree on. Okay.
Yeah.
Good night, everybody.
But I was wondering, what's the boundary between a proper protection and the patent choice? Because there is some question from audience I just summarized. So basically, we are thinking about transition from Web 1 to 3, from reading, writing, and ownership. Web 3 about ownership. If we see all these generated arts borrow from other people's idea, but then your idea, your creation can be borrowed from other people. Because if there are no proper protections, that means you don't own anything. Then how do we promote ownership? Because when you see the full definition of ownership is you have a full control of your content, so you can get benefit, either morally or economically. But right now, if we see there are no protection, how people gonna reward creativities?
Well, I'm honestly not that worried about borrowing the notions of ideas. I'm going to harp on this again. This is back to the idea expression dichotomy, right? And this is you wouldn't have any music at all if you couldn't borrow from somebody else's ideas. Elvis borrowed from legendary early African American blues and jazz folks, and then rockabilly folks borrowed from Elvis, and then so on down the line. So that's really what the Copyright Act is for, right? Is to protect your innovation, to protect your the incentive to create. It's not to jealously guard your protection in your intellectual property as your right, so to speak. It's not your, it's not a property right in something that you've won. It's an incentive that the government creates for creators to create things in the future, which is why it's for limited times. We can go into whether the current time limit that's on copyright is limited or not. That's a whole nother different discussion entirely. But I'm not overly worried that the notion of someone borrowing from your art is going to disincentivize people from creating art in the future, both because, like I said, people have borrowed from art, whether it's music or visual art, for centuries, and because that's really allowed under the law if you're borrowing the idea. Now, if you're taking someone, if you said, I like the way someone drew that circle or that square or that painting, and I'm going to draw like that in mine, and you're copying the expression itself, then you've taken a step too far. We're just dealing with old problems with new technology, really, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about somebody putting a drawing down on a light board and tracing it. It's different from somebody learning from something. Look, I think people don't fully think through kind of what's the implications for some of the things that they're suggesting are. In other words, like, imagine if like somebody wants to learn to throw a football and they have to call up and get permission from Tom Brady to watch his video to learn how to throw a football, because in other words, people are trying to expand the notion of what copyright is without fully understanding what copyright currently is, right? In other words, I didn't call up Ernest Hemingway to learn how to write staccato sentences or run-on sentences, right? And if I had to, I never would have. Ernest Hemingway, well, first of all, he was dead, but if he was alive during the time, I was pretty sure he wouldn't respond to my little request to to learn how to do some basic writing. And over the course of time, I learned how to write certain kinds of sentences just from reading his work. And of course, then I evolved it into my own over time, right? It becomes a morph, and that's what it is. So I'll even sort of take issue with the word of borrowing, right? It's, in other words, like in the learning process, we learn about how certain things are done. And then over that time, we begin to abstract that out into our own things. So I use run-on sentences all the time in certain aspects of my own articles, right? But I use them in very, very different ways from the various folks that I learned from as a kid as I was learning how to write, right? And I just used Hemingway as a single example, right? But I use them in a very different way to express kind of a fluidity in certain aspects of ideas, where Hemingway, for instance, would use them particularly for action sequences of a person goes over the hill and is chasing the lion and whatever. It's always for action sequences. I think it can be useful for that. But there's other ways to use it. So it's really the idea that everyone's going to own for eternity every aspect of something. Again, Tom Brady throws a football, and nobody ever can look at that and learn how to throw a perfect spiral. And it's, again, not a place we want to. It's not a place people want to be. They really need to think about the implications of what they're asking for. Every artist who ever went and saw Julie Bell as a fantasy artist, right, and would never be able to learn from her creations, or never learn from the other folks on ArtStation or in the cinematic books or whatever that we get, that wouldn't be a fun place to live. So I hope that we don't see that.
Yes. So we have another half hour, so maybe let's get some of the questions from audience. We do have some interesting questions from audience. So I will not follow the sequence because one of them are very similar to what's the stuff I prepared. So Stability Diffusion made copying artists and generating porn harder, and users get mad using the news. It's recent news. It's just I think 3 days ago. So one of the audience asked, is any way to prevent AI to generate something with copyright infringement risks? So what do you do to make the AI not generating something infringing? Do you have you done anything in the technical point of view in Stability AI?
No, this is really just like a misunderstanding of like how things work again, right? In other words, like the people looked at it and said, well, we must have purged the database of all this stuff. And no, it's just a different model that learned different things. So we didn't actually do anything specifically to say like, those artists are not there or those kinds of things. It's just you could do that, I suppose, if you wanted to make sure that if an artist wanted to opt out and didn't want their stuff in there, then I suppose that you could theoretically protect that. But again, I think if someone was creative enough to say, I want watercolor that's messy and with an underpainting of ink that shows through the watercolor or whatever that could describe somebody's style. So again, but the question you asked is infringing, right? And so again, that's a very specific word, as Michael will tell you. And infringing is not to be redefined as style. It needs to be defined as somebody produced an exact copy of something that already exists. And the AI, having learned from 5 billion images and probably soon 500 billion images, is going to be very hard pressed to recreate anything exactly. And it would probably be 100 million lifetimes before that happened, like in terms of an edge case, right? So I think you prevent it by giving it mass amounts of data so that it learns the concepts, right? If you prevent it from doing that by pulling out the same clock and making sure that there are other same images of the clock, right? So it's really a matter of like the sheer amount of information that the AI learns.
Okay, great. So I have another question. It's from Run Master. It's a very long question and a lot of legal words. So I try to read it, but some of the words I don't even know. So let me try. The U.S. Copyright Office originally approved an artist's comic book style story, Zaya of the Dawn, which utilized AI technology to assist in creating illustrations for the story. On second review, the Copyright Office rescinded the registration due to the author used Midjourney in creating the illustrations. While the author's attorney filed a response to that refusal today. This case will give creators who use AI insights into the copyright ability of illustration created using assistance of AI tools such as Midjourney. I'm of the belief that this is other use Midjourney should be not take away her rights as the author. I further believe this distinguishable from a Panelist AI image, which was wholly created by AI. What's your thoughts on this? I think it's asking Michael. Can you answer a little bit about this thing?
I don't know. That's a hard question, right? I mean, what are your thoughts on what the Copyright Office should do for protecting human-assisted AI images? It's a hard question. I mean, I think it's something that the Copyright Office is struggling with right now. And I didn't even know that they filed a response today. That's interesting to know. You can file an appeal. Generally difficult to win Copyright Office appeals, but I mean, I think that Daniel raises a really interesting point earlier when he was talking about, is the AI is your paintbrush, right? That's probably what these people are authoring, what these people are arguing to the Copyright Office, is that the AI is as a paintbrush, and if the Copyright Office is arguing against them, be like, well, gosh darn, that's a pretty darn smart paintbrush, right? My paintbrush doesn't learn all the styles of the past and help me create a completely new image. It's hard. I mean, I don't think that there's an easy answer to this. And I probably, it's a hard question. I don't have a yes or a no on it.
Yeah, it's really, so let's see what the lawsuit comes and Also, I feel like there's as you mentioned, there's a huge technology gap between the lawmakers and actually in the industry, right? So it's so lag behind, and I think lawmakers should catch up a little bit to help creators to create more instead of prevent us from creating. So then I want to say, is there any interesting companies or startup coming up to do something to helping creators to protect themselves and doing things to helping the creator economy to build the ecosystem to reward originalities from the investment point of view? Do you see any interesting stuff coming up, the team?
I haven't. I mean, your mind probably immediately jumps to Web3 and thinking about things that would live in various blockchains. That, that, as you can imagine, has the momentum behind that, and sort of investing dollars have slowed down a bit. FTX didn't, help that any as well. But aside from that, I have not seen anything that sort of achieves that. I mean, it definitely would be interesting to take a look at least, from a curiosity standpoint for me, from a product side. Now, how much sort of value there is to that, what the TAM would be on that, I think I would have questions around, frankly, to be honest. But, I'm curious enough to want to see these types of companies. I just haven't, frankly, seen many of them.
Okay.
Tim, more of the value's got to be in the monetization as opposed to the protection, right? I mean,
yes,
right.
If you're talking about like reselling original works, is that what you're thinking about?
I mean, so to what Daniel's talking about, if you can create a super fun new API that spits out you in a fancy new dress, and you can find some way to monetize that on a social media platform with ads, and people are going to flock to that. That's the stuff that I see kind of creeping up that has that kind of buzz to it. I think that's what people are interested in, or am I off?
I mean, could be. I haven't seen any of them, to be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, that use case you could imagine would exist for sure on, say like a fashion website, for example. That would make a lot of sense, right? Like generate an image of 10 different women wearing this shirt so that, the audience gets a broader view of what that shirt looks like on different people. That makes a ton of sense.
And nobody steal the idea. It's mine and Tim's.
It's already out there. I'm sorry. It's already done.
It doesn't work. The copy doesn't work. It can't be copied anymore. So
don't come to me with that investment idea. I'm not sure I'll pick up, but I haven't seen any, frankly. Yep.
Yeah. So then my question,
the Web3 thing would be incredibly challenging. I think a lot of people talk about the Web3, and again, FTX hasn't done anybody any favors. My friend Chris Dixon said that the game's not over yet. I said it might be, but he's smarter than me, so maybe it's not. But I mean, I don't know. I think I dealt with Warner Brothers at one point in my career, and I think they had like a gigantic database, and it was like, I don't know, don't quote me, I think it was half their budget or something gigantic amount to run this sort of rights management database for music. And it was like to make sure that like the Roadie's brother's divorced sister's kid could get 1 trillion% of a cent for this song that was played this time on a radio jingle or whatever. I'm like, but now you're talking about not creating that just for like a limited subset of things. And again, AI is not a database. It's not fetching something from a database. Again, a complete misunderstanding of how this stuff works. So I don't even know how you would do that, but you're certainly not going to build. I don't know anyone technologically at this point who could build a gigantic like reward system that's automated for the entire world across its jurisdictions to reward someone for 1 trillionth of a cent for supposedly potentially being the inspiration of something. I don't know how you even technically feasibly build that, and that it wouldn't be like the most gameable system in the history of man in terms of like, and we finally got an appearance from Michael Son. Welcome Michael Son, making it much more interesting than any of us here.
With no close on to food.
Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. Yes. So okay, good. So then let me see the other questions do we have. So one question is for Daniel. So SD, I think stands for stability. Stable diffusion is very good at replicating art style. It can be replicating style like Leonardo da Vinci, even though da Vinci only have about 20 different surviving paintings. So theoretically, if someone want to train an AI with different style, would they just be able to do that with little as 20 images?
Yeah, so it depends. I mean, actually, the general amount is something like you're seeing a lot of this with Dream Booth. So Dream Booth has the ability to fine tune models, and it allows people to add concepts that the AI might know. And actually, there's been a number of artists who are kind of putting in their own styles or whatever to help it replicate. I've seen in a number of, I watched an artist train up a model with his particular style, and then generate images of various sculptures in resin and copper. So in other words, the artist is basically training in their own style and then generating potential ideas for sculptures that they could then potentially construct themselves or do iterations on. So it was this kind of co-creative process. So usually it's about 1,000 images usually that are particularly for somebody for the image to really kind of, or the AI to really understand a particular style. And again, yeah, it's I think you're going to see sort of more and more kind of artists doing that and then doing this kind of co-creative thing, right? That's sort of, Michael described that a bit earlier, and I think Tim did too, where I see artists kind of jamming with the artificial intelligence. So I can imagine in not too distant future, someone might play, a riff and then go, okay, give me 50 continuations of that. And then they like listen to them. They're like, oh, number 6, that's awesome. Play that again. Okay, cool. Well, and then, okay, I'm going to do a variation on that. Okay, cool. Record that and then do that iteration of continuance again, right? And so there's this kind of this co-creative thing. And I think a lot of our authors artists are going to do that sort of thing too, where they kind of build in their own style. And I think concept houses and dress designers and everyone else are going to kind of rapidly integrate their own stuff so they can ideate faster and prototype things faster. And I think that's going to be it's already happening, and I think it's tremendously exciting. I think people are going to be incredibly excited by it as it develops.
Yeah, I can say it's as a hobby, it's very good. But for some people make a living in creating songs and articles, making art, they want their creation to be protected, because if I creating something, because other people are good at selling, they sell my stuff on internet, but I don't own the rights. Then what's happening? It's just they encourage me to creating something new, because somebody will borrow it and make money out of it. So from the legal point of view, we do something to not make that happen.
Are you asking me? I mean, I don't
because
I don't think most people want to do that. Actually, I think that's a fundamental misunderstanding of how things work, right? Mm-hmm. The idea that most people want to train in somebody's style and then sell, I don't know, NFTs or whatever based on that. I don't see a lot of people wanting to do that. In fact, like when I see people taking a style, they don't just generate something in Van Gogh, like they might add Van Gogh to the prompt with 100 other ideas, so that it's 1/100th of the idea, and it's a combination of influence to create something unique. I think most people, 99% of people, want to create something unique. And there's always a small subset of people, even before artificial intelligence, that want to try to just ape something that somebody else has done. But again, you don't need artificial intelligence to do that. I mean, if I'm a jewelry creator, I could, and I'm somebody who doesn't have a lot of scruples, and I go on Etsy and I don't know, I just copy the jewelry of somebody else in a very, very similar way and sell it because I think it's awesome. I would argue that person's not very creative. And so again, you don't really need there's already cases like this. You don't really need artificial intelligence. It's not really a new concept for somebody to go do something. The idea is whether somebody does something very transformative. But again, it's people are trying to sort of put that as this is some kind of issue just with artificial intelligence. But it's not. Like again, this is an old thing where if I don't know, I like your vest or whatever you're wearing there, and I want to go, try to copy that exactly, but I don't need artificial intelligence to do that. It's an old issue. So I think people are asking sort of a red herring of a question there. It's you don't need artificial intelligence to do that.
Yeah, it happens actually a lot. So you think maybe we are on the bright side, but because we Husky is doing brand protections. I did a survey. USPTO says there's $3 trillion of counterfeit goods in the market. $3 trillion. So that means there's a huge market of people. Then AI will empower them to generating counterfeit even faster, because they know the channel, they know how to sell. Then it becomes an even harder problem to solve. Because right now fighting counterfeit is a big problem, right? Even though we don't see it's a lot, because it's happening a lot. So that is giving me a concern about if that's become too popular, creating something so easy, then people will just keep copying, right? So that's one of my concerns. I don't know if there's an answer, but that's something I really want to find the answer as well. Yeah.
I'm not even sure that necessarily AI makes the problem of counterfeiting more difficult, right? Because counterfeiting is easy copy, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's not the kind of copying necessarily that we're worried about in
Mm-hmm.
AI. We're worried about that copying, about where is the line between, oh, well, that's just his style that I'm being inspired by, and I'm actually copying something that was protectable about his expression.
Mm-hmm.
The counterfeit idea is you just stole my stuff, right? You just you just straight up copied it because you know that the Gucci name sells or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
To what Tim was talking about earlier with Web3 and elements of the blockchain, I think that's probably where you're going to see some more kind of movement in terms of counterfeits, whether it's going to be using the blockchain, as a ledger to essentially act as a certification that a good is what you say it is. It has its own problems, but it's probably one of the elements that's being looked at in kind of at least counterfeits as probable use case.
Okay, good. So we have that's interesting. So we have another question from the audience. So what will happen when students start using large language models to write their term papers? Do they get claimed that the papers they turning in are original because they probed the AI? So basically, what humans should learn, right? So we just say, okay, write the paper for me, right? And then
so you're telling me students are going to cheat sometimes? Like again, they didn't need AI to do this. So these are. I feel
because
like again,
people
insert AI into every sort of edge case.
Because original copy is become so easy to detect. If you use AI to generate something, it's easy, but it's not being detectable because, as Michael said, you copy your style, you copy your couple idea because it's hard to detect right now. So if I doing this, then I'm turning my paper so easy. I don't need a copy. I just generate, right? So that's a question.
I mean, I suppose when the AI gets smart enough to generate coherent ideas over the course of an entire 35-page paper, that's more challenging. I guess, but students have been cheating since the dawn of time. I guess if they wanted to, and they're clever at it. I think the wisest students realize they're generally cheating themselves, right? If they don't do the work. So that doesn't overly, again, it doesn't overly concern me. If it's something that wise students are not going to cheat, they're going to write the paper themselves so that they learn what it is that they're supposedly paying $150,000 a year for that education for in college or whatever it is. Not cost now, it's expensive. So again, it seems like an edge case designed to point out something that's not a a huge difference from what students already do now and getting away with like stuff if they want to. But again, smart students don't do it.
I'll worry
Yeah,
about
so-
that when I burn out from being a big law lawyer and I have to become a professor. I think that's pretty edgy as well.
So there's one question is on the flip side, does the panel think it is fair for someone to exactly copy AI generated work as it was not created by human? So because humans are protected, AI is not. If I copy AI, is that creating a problem?
I mean, from a purely legal standpoint, if you have a piece of art that's purely created by artificial intelligence and you can't get a copyright registration on it, then you don't really have a cause of action to file a lawsuit based on copyright infringement. You could think of some other novel claim, maybe an unfair competition claim, maybe somebody uses it on the side of a handbag and it's associated with it, and you can come up with some kind of trade dress claim. But if you don't have a copyright registration, you do not have a copyright infringement claim.
Oh, good. Yeah, so it's really
I mean,
hard.
I think like a couple of problems I see with this is one, a lot of the stuff's already sitting on GitHub today, right?
Mhm.
Including the Stable Diffusion stuff.
Yeah.
And what's going to happen over time is, it's very clear this is where things are going. You're not going to just use the base Stable Diffusion, right? You're going to retrain it and build your sort of instance of the model that's, again, tuned and sort of trained with the hyperparameters and such as you need to sort of get the outcomes that you want for whatever it is that you're trying to create against. So I think the idea that, is being asked is an interesting one, but I don't think in terms of like how it's going to be used in the end state is exactly what is being asked, right? Like I talked about this at the beginning of the panel. I think everything's going to wind up being retrained over time. I mean, that's what's happening on Hugging Face, right? Like, why is Hugging Face popular, right? Well, it's because you get the kernels for all the models you actually need. There's some folks who are just use the base models, but a lot of times people are just downloading models and retraining them further. And I think once that starts to be more commonplace, and it will be over the next year or two, it's going to be very hard to say that you copied an AI because everyone's respective AIs will be, the first, second, third derivative of the kernel that they used. So I actually think it's going to be impossible.
Yeah, you might call that the billion models scenario, which is I agree we're sort of on the beginning of it right now, where people are just like, oh yeah, the base model is cool, but like I want to train in these 15 different things and then create it something that's totally unique. I think it comes down to a lot of these questions kind of come down to should we rewrite the law to worry about the few folks who don't want to create something unique and who want to try to find a way to make something exactly like someone else's stuff. I mean, my thinking is that the vast majority of people want to do stuff that's unique. They want to create something unique. The vast majority of people don't want to create something that's just someone else's, right? That's not even, it's not very interesting, right? It might be interesting for somebody if they're just creating a meme or something like that, but it's not very interesting for artists or creators. So I think everybody wants to express themselves in a unique way, and I think the sort of billion model scenario where people are basically retraining it and creating a sort of unique algorithm to their own sort of style. There's an artist that I was watching that took when Stable Diffusion 2 came out, it wasn't able to generate her very specific way that she was using Stable Diffusion 1, and so she retrained it to like get back her particular style that she'd engineered through like hundreds of different prompts and was able to sort of consistently produce. I think more and more people are going to do that kind of stuff exactly as Michael described. As Tim described.
Yeah, so there's one comment from the audience says AI makes cheating is way easy. There was no way to write a whole paper in a few minutes without directly copying. So basically, it's we are kind of hard to make a decision to say, is this really creating something new or is it copying something, just mix up things together, right? So that's actually is very intriguing question for myself as well. So I once asked myself a question. So what should I learn, right? Because AI can write better paper than me, write better songs than me, make better drawings than me. So I don't need to learn anything. I just need to use AI to create what I need, right? Then we should tell our young generation, you should learn this. They will tell you, okay, I don't need to learn because the AI can help me to do better things. So then how do we motivate the next generation to learn something new? Yeah.
Again, I don't think that that's going to be the case, right? That's sort of, you're positing a sort of like you're positing a scenario where the entirety of 8 billion people on the planet, like, or the whatever percentage of them are young, 4 billion or 5 billion at a time, are not going to want to learn anything and are just going to turn that over to the machines to do the work for them. So that in school that they never write a paper or they never, because again, it's sort of better than them. I think the reality is that that's not going to be the case, in the same way, again, that there are already Go machines that can beat the greatest Go players in the world and also play games in a completely unique way. So actually, if you watch the AlphaGo documentary, the AlphaGos that came after that, AlphaGo Zero, were actually even stronger than the one that beat Leaf Dahl. And they were stronger in a way that they actually didn't learn from human games at all. So AlphaGo Zero basically learned by playing itself over time, and it actually learned a whole bunch of unique strategies that humans never figured out in 3,000 years. And so did people go, well, you know what, now the AI just does it better, what's the point? No, like now, again, like I said earlier, there's whole websites dedicated to the few games that AlphaGo Zero played publicly, where people study those strategies and get better as human players, right? And they continue to play Go and they continue to be obsessed with it because Go in and of itself is a unique activity. It's something that the pleasure of it comes from the act of doing it. Just like with me, when I sit down to write an article tomorrow, I'm not worried about a large language model being able to create an article exactly like mine tomorrow. I'm still going to sit down for 3 hours and work on an article for the sheer joy of it. And I love the way that time displaces when I'm working on my art. And I love people when they play Go, love the social aspects of those things, right? And the creativity of challenging their mind. And I think when people are learning things in school, yeah, I guess there's always going to be cheaters who want to say like, well, the AI can do it better. But so who cares? Well, that's a terrible attitude. That's what I would tell the young generation. There's a great deal of pleasure in learning to write for yourself or to do these kinds of things. And the smartest people and the best and brightest people and most successful people in life are going to have done the aspect themselves and just use the AI as an assistant later, to help them, do boring stuff. But there's no, but to say that everyone's just going to stop learning and turn it over to the machine seems to me like a very far removed possibility it's not likely to play out in reality.
Okay, good.
Again, I think people talk about AI. I mean, I think I blame Terminator 2 in a lot of ways for this like concern around sentient AIs coming down from the skies and like attacking us all. Like that's just where people's head goes. And I think we've been trained by watching too much content online and sort of assuming that, AI somehow has some like negative overtones to it and it's going to replace human thought and, kill us all. Like, I don't know. I understand where these questions are sort of coming from, but I tend to agree with Daniel pretty heavily here. Like, I think there's a little bit of misunderstanding in terms of, how it works, but also what the motivations for it really are. It could be, the motivations turn into something like really, really bad, right? However, I don't think that's the case. And so it's really fascinating to see these questions sort of come in where it's just like replacing, will this AI, replace X, or will it replace Y, where people use it for this nefarious reason? It's just, it's fascinating, but I understand why these questions are coming in.
I mean, everything exists on a spectrum of good to evil, right? This is my water bottle, right? I can drink water out of it, or I can hit you over the head with it. But 99.9% of the people are going to drink water out of it. And we keep talking about like the 0.1% that hits somebody over the head with it. So should we not have this water bottle because one idiot hits someone over the head with it? No, we should have the water bottle, right? Because the water bottle is very useful for drinking water. Right?
But you think about the legal system and all the architecture of a country, of the financial system. It's just to have a system to prevent this small possibility to happen. So that's why the 99% of people enjoy the framework, enjoy the life they are enjoying, right? If let's say one person use a bottle hit people without any consequences, more people will learn from it. Okay, I can hit people use this bottle. I think that's the legal point of view, is to have the framework to have a majority of people to enjoy their life without the small percentage of people to abuse the system, to make the system done work, right? So maybe this one small percent.
But that already exists, right? In other words, if you hit me over the head with this bottle, like you're probably going to go to jail. Like that system already exists, right?
So that's why the legal system, I think, because we are working for the legal system for a couple of years. So that's I really believing is the legal setup, the framework, legal and financial system setup framework for the creator to create. So that's way they can enjoy the freedom of creation without being hurt by the other people. Because even the bad people or people with vicious intent is a small percent, but we have to do something to stop that small percent become a bigger percent, right? That's, I think, a whole purpose of protection legal system, to make a majority of people more enjoy their life, right? Yeah, so I think we are about the time. So it's a really interesting discussion. I think we should do it more often. And there's a lot of questions we didn't have a chance to answer right now. So, but we will ask our panelists to answer offline if possible. So at the end, we'll do some analysis of this recording, and then to write a summary and share with the community. Thank you very much for this late evening conversation, and thank you people from all over the world to join us. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Tim,
everyone.
Dan, and Michael. See you next time.
Take care.
Take care.